Good morning, everyone. Today we are going to be planting our onion plants. I did not start these from seed. I purchased them from Dixondale Farms in Texas. I picked up Copra and Walla Walla onions. They arrived about 3 days ago. I just took them out of their packaging right now and submerged the roots in some water. While these are soaking up water and getting coming back to life, I'm going to go work the beds a little bit and get them ready for transplanting. Alright, we're at the onion bed. So this L shape here is going to be where I'm going to put all of our onions. I currently have pine needles down, pine straw as a bedding. What I'm going to do is rake all this pine straw off, and then I'm just going to add some sifted compost to the top and reapply the pine straw. We practice a no-till method, so we won't be tilling up the soil and disturbing the microorganisms that are within the healthy soil. But we are going to remove this mulch to make it easier to apply the compost. Now that we've got our mulch removed, you can see that there are some seedlings popping up. These are actually rhizomes from grass outside the bed that have made their way inside our garden bed and have sprouted. So what I'm going to do now is go through and pull all those grass sprouts up and get a nice clean surface to add compost to. Do your best to pull the bunches of grass out with their roots still attached. If you do end up breaking the leaflets off the top of the root system, it's not a huge deal. It will end up sprouting again later on in the season, but we're covering it over with mulch again, which is going to hamper its ability to grow. There's no such thing as a maintenance-free garden, but this is pretty darn close. I really don't have to come out here and weed very often. If I see something growing, I'll just pull it while I'm out here, and it's pretty easy to stay on top of. We've been working this soil for about 4 years now, and as you can tell, it's super rich, super dark, full of nutrients. Nice and light and crumbly. We've got a good base that we're just going to make better by adding compost to it. Alright, we're back at the compost pile. In my previous video, which I'll link above, I added all of our chicken litter to this compost pile and tilled it up to get all the nutrients mixed into it. What I'm going to do now is kind of dig a little hole in the center here, push all the newer stuff on top to get to the older compost that's more well broken down and decomposed. And then I'm going to sift it and we'll get it added to our onion beds. Oh, that didn't really work. We just had an avalanche. So our older compost doesn't actually look as good as the newer stuff on top. I'm thinking this just didn't get tilled well enough last year to get oxygenated. It's nice and moist, but it's very cold. It doesn't have any heat to it, which I guess is to be expected coming out of winter. But it just didn't break down as nicely as the chickens. The chickens did a fantastic job of breaking down their litter. So what I think I'm going to do is forget about digging up the oldest compost at the bottom of the pile and just sift through our newer stuff at the top. As I mentioned in the previous video, the chicken litter, the manure, the majority of it that was in there is already well rotted and decomposed, so I don't have to worry about burning our root system or anything on the onions. So I'm going to get rid of this and just use all the new stuff to sift. Alright, so I've got sifted compost here. Super nice and rich. It's got everything from little bits of charcoal all the way down to ash from burns that we've done making maple syrup. All that ash I've given to the chickens and or added to the compost pile. Some pine shavings from the chickens. There's manure mixed in here. Leaf litter from the yard fall cleanup last year. Little bits of grass that we've collected throughout the summer last year. When we mow the yard, we've got a bag clipping catcher, and we add all of our clippings to the compost pile. Little twigs, just even something like this. It's not going to break down very fast, but it'll help keep things aerated. It kind of props itself up against other things and it keeps the soil nice and loose and aerated. What else do we have in here? Just general yard waste. I tend not to throw weeds in here for fear of the seeds surviving and then growing in the gardens, which is obviously a bad thing. But yeah, so that's primarily what's in here. We got some pine needles, some pine straw mixed in as well. Let's go get this added to the To the onion bed, as I said, our soil, we've been working it for 3-4 years now. It's in pretty good shape, so we don't need a ton of compost. Just a light dusting over the top of our existing bed will do wonders. The worms down in there, they love fresh litter like this. They'll come up and they'll eat it and they'll poop it out and they'll drill holes through the soil everywhere. This is just a great addition to your garden. You can't go wrong with compost. And by the way, if you do any filming of any sorts, these Joby mounts are just incredible. Look at that. You can mount it to anything. I've got links in the description to all my camera gear that I use if you're interested in one of these. I've got this Ames rake here. I really like it because it's got longer tines, which are great for removing the mulch. And then these smaller tines on the top side of the rake are awesome for kind of spreading out the compost on the top. Like I said, we don't till our gardens, so we really don't need these big tines to drill down in there or anything. Just this nice smaller layer of tines to spread it out works perfectly. I suppose I should mention that I'm working with raised garden beds. I made the decision to work with raised beds actually before we moved to this property. When I was in college, I started getting into gardening. It wasn't really something that my parents did. I think what inspired me was watching some Netflix documentaries on how conventional farming is really destroying the planet. And I mean, what are you gonna do? We've got such a large population, and that method is great for producing. It's an assembly line, basically. It's not good for the environment, but it's the only way that we're able to feed our population. There are other methods that it's hard to replicate on a large commercial scale like that, but we can do it pretty easily in our backyards. So watching those Netflix documentaries kind of inspired me to take responsibility for my own food. I grew up a hunter. I'm getting way off topic right now, but I'll wrap it up quick. I grew up a hunter, and that was a great way to bring in some meat, but as mentioned, I never had a garden growing up, so I wasn't really bringing in my own fruits or vegetables, and that felt like something that was missing from my life. So when I was in college, I built my own raised beds in my parents' backyard and started gardening. I think I maybe had those beds a couple of seasons, and then we bought this property, and I took my existing beds, brought them here, and laid them out in a different design to kind of maximize the amount of space that I had to work with the existing wood, so I wouldn't have to purchase anything new. The benefits to raised beds are, number one, they are great for keeping things that encroach out of them. As you saw earlier, we did get some grass rhizomes coming up and through the beds, but can you imagine if this was on the same plane as the yard? The grass would take over it so quickly. The raised beds kind of act as a barrier to prevent the spread of outside growth into your garden. On top of that, you're lifting the growing surface up and away from the ground. So if you are in an area that retains moisture too much, is too soggy to really grow anything, putting in a raised bed is a great idea because the water will kind of drain out of that bed, out into the yard, and keep your plants from getting root rot and dying. Another benefit is here in Wisconsin, obviously we have some very cold winters. The raised beds allow the beds to heat up, to warm up quicker than the surrounding soil. Think of surface area. You're lifting your bed up, you're giving it more surface area around the sides, more sun exposure, the warm summer breezes hitting the sides of the beds. It just penetrates into it and warms it up a lot quicker than a solid surface of ground that has no three-dimensional surface area to it. Another benefit, though my beds are relatively short to the ground, is you're not having to bend over as much. Granted, I still have to bend over, but it does bring it up 6 inches or so, so it's just kind of nice to have a working surface that's not down at your foot level. It's up a little bit higher. So those are just a few of the benefits to raised beds that I could think of off the top of my head. Sorry for kind of getting on a rant there and rambling about my life story. Alright, so I've got my onions here that have been soaking in the water. Their roots are no longer dry, they're moist and have soaked up quite a bit of water already. This is going to give them a great head start when I transplant them. I've got Walla Walla onions and Copra onions. Walla Wallas are actually the first onions I ever grew, and I'll throw a picture in here. I had a phenomenal season. I grew some really big, softball size, if not bigger, Walla Walla onions. They're super sweet, I love them, but they don't store very well, so after you harvest them, you have to consume them pretty quickly. The Copra onions, on the other hand, they will store for quite a while, so I kind of like to plant a variety of onions here. The first thing I like to do when I get my onions is divide them out by largest, medium, smallest, and then I'll make sure that I put the largest ones in the bed first, because those are going to be the healthiest and eventually turn into the largest bulbs. They've got the biggest head start, basically. So this, for instance, is quite girthy, quite thick. It's like the size of my pinky. This is going to be a great onion. This one, on the other hand, it's very tiny. It'll take a lot longer for this one to develop into a big bulb. It's not worthless though. I'll end up planting our onions I'll plant the big ones about 6 inches apart, and then you can fill that gap in with another smaller onion, and as these start to develop, you can pull them early as scallions and use them in your cooking, and then let the bigger ones continue to grow. Alright, now that I've got my onions separated by size, what I like to do is use my finger to press a little hole into the soil, and then I'll take my onion, root side down obviously, and I'll stick the roots down into the soil and backfill it and just kind of pinch the soil up against the base of the bulb a little bit to keep it standing upright. And then about every 6 inches I'm going to put one of my big onion plants, and then I'll come back depending on how many I have left over, and I can fill in the gaps in between them with a slightly smaller one. As I mentioned, we'll pull those early once they start turning into scallions, and consume them then. And that'll give these bigger guys more room to grow, for the bulbs to grow out and expand and get nice and big. You want to make sure that you are planting into the soil and not into your compost too. The plant needs contact with the soil. And then for the second row, I'm just going to plant it again 6 inches away. And you know what? I'm going to stagger these so that we've got a big bulb here and make a triangle basically, so that when these expand out, they've got a little bit more room to grow. Alright, I've used up all my big ones already. It's a good thing I planted them on this side. Our sun exposure is to the south, that direction. So these plants are going to get a lot bigger than the other plants sooner, which good gardening practice is to grow anything shorter towards the sun, anything taller to the back. Obviously, if you put the taller stuff in the front, it's going to shade out the smaller stuff behind it. So it's a good thing I planted these on this side first. Now I'm going to jump down to my medium size set and start putting those in, and then I'll finish off with the smalls, and if I have any left over, which actually I might not, if I do have any left over, I'll start filling in the gaps in between these guys. Okay, I was actually able to plant all of our onions 6 inches apart, and I didn't have to come back and fill in the gaps between any of them because I was able to fill out my bed with what I had. Now, I'm going to come back with my pine straw that I removed and kind of just fill in the gaps in between here. I've said it before and I'll say it 1,000 times more. Mother Nature is modest, she loves to be covered. If I left this exposed as it is right now, everything is just going to dry out, turn into dust, blow away, get really mucky and saturated. And rainstorms, this is not a good way to garden. If you look at Mother Nature as an example, everywhere you look there's some kind of a covering, whether it be grass, leaf litter in the forests, in the woods, fallen trees and bark, pine straw under the pine trees. Everywhere you look, there's some kind of a covering on the ground, and Mother Nature is thriving. Anywhere that we've come through and we've removed that covering, think of conventional agriculture, you go out into those farm fields and the soil is just dead. There's no microorganism life to it. That's why they have to come through and fertilize everything each and every year, till up the soil because it just becomes compacted and turns into concrete. It's dead. It's dead soil. That's not the right way to do it. So by keeping a covering on your garden, you are reducing weed growth. any seeds that blow in, any weed seeds that blow in, get stuck on top of the mulch. They can't make their way to the soil to take root. They die on top of your mulch. If we get a lot of rain, it acts as a sponge. It soaks up that water and slowly lets it back into the soil, so you're not just saturated with water all at once. If there's too much moisture, the mulch will repel water, so you're not drowning your crops out. It breaks down over time and feeds the soil below it, so you're not having to come through and add. I came through and put a layer of compost down. That's the extent of what I do. I don't have to fertilize throughout the season. Everything that I'm doing right now is going to take it through the whole season. It's going to break down and keep adding nutrients to the soil. The mulch will keep your soil nice and fluffy and aerated. It prevents it from compacting. There's endless benefits to using mulch. It's really hard to do on large scale commercial farming, but in your backyard there's really no excuse not to do it, and you're going to have a better quality product at the end of the season and be thankful that you used a mulch. Plus it's better for the environment, so Mother Nature thanks you too. So I'm just going to put this down, I don't know, maybe 3-4 inches deep in between all of our onions. Onions and garlic don't mind a slightly acidic soil. Actually, they thrive in it. So using pine straw is a great way to incorporate some acidity into your soil. It's an all-natural way of doing it. No synthetic fertilizers needed. Okay, now that I have our Walla Walla onions on this side of the bed, I'm going to go ahead and plant our Copra onions on this side. Now that I've got them sorted out, I'm going to repeat the same steps I did on that side. Make the holes, stick them in the ground, pinch the soil up against it, and come back with mulch. Oh, I should mention this time, I'm going to take my bigger onions, which are going to grow quicker than the smaller onions, and I'm going to start them back here. The sun comes from that direction. I want my taller plants on the back side of the bed, my shorter plants up front. All right, now that I've got all of our mulch back on the beds, all this excess mulch, I'm just gonna load up and throw into my orchard for the time being until I need to use it somewhere else. All right, now that we've got the mulch back on, I'm gonna do a light watering just to kind of compact everything down so it doesn't blow away. We do have some rain in the forecast, so I don't really have to water these too much. And once we get that rain, this mulch is going to hold that moisture there and release it slowly into the soil. Since we pre-soaked the roots, they really don't need too much water anyways. So that's going to finish up our video on transplanting onions. This is really one of the easiest ways to do it. Just purchase the onion sets. When they arrive, throw them in your garden, and they're pretty much self-sufficient from there. You really don't have to do much to get an onion to grow. They're one of the easiest crops, in my experience, to grow, and we eat a lot of onions here, so we plant quite a few as well. Before I wrap up this video, I wanted to show you our garlic. I'll put a link in the upper corner of the video to when I planted this garlic last fall before winter hit, but it is looking great. All 11 of the 12 that I planted are coming up right now. This is music garlic, which is a very large garlic head, so you get quite a bit of garlic for a single clove that you plant in the ground. Historically, I've had a lot of issues growing garlic. It's supposed to be a pretty easy crop to grow, but I've never had much luck, so it's reassuring to see this progress already this season. Well, I hope you guys learned something today, and I'll are out in your gardens getting ready for the season. I'm gonna round out my weekend with my last major boil of maple syrup. If you haven't already seen my 3-part series on how to make maple syrup, I'll drop the link for that in the upper corner of the screen. Check it out. Hope you guys all enjoyed. Hope I inspired you to get out and start working in your own gardens. It's good to be able to break away from our normal monotonous routines, get outside, enjoy the weather, and get your hands dirty, reconnect with the earth that sustains life as we know it. Take care, everybody. I'll see you in the next video.